We'll start with a land acknowledgement as well. The town of Grimsby is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Adirondack, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work, the town of Grimsby stands with all Indigenous peoples past and present in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Now we'll turn to the agenda. The first item on the agenda will be a safety moment, followed by a project review, analysis overview, heritage evaluation, recommendations, and the discussion period at the end, as we noted. So first up is the safety moment. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, we're back to school now, and driving safely is a very important aspect of that. Just for everyone, just to be aware of your increased following distance around school buses and cars driving by as they go to school to and from. Also watch out for flashing lights for school buses. Watch for kids that appear in unexpected places, which is totally true. And also never block a sidewalk or a crosswalk either, as people may be coming when they're not expecting.
David, sorry to interrupt. I just got a message. I don't think everyone could see our screen earlier. Apologies for that. Can everyone see it now?
We can, Megan.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. So just make sure that everyone can see that code of conduct, and we'll just go through that before we get into the presentation. All right, so just the code of conduct for the meeting, just so everyone is on board with this, is to be courteous, listen and respect the opinions of others. We also asked the question, if individuals have questions, let us know if the statement is unclear, and we can circle back to the slide that that may have been on. Participate fully in the discussion, but don't dominate the discussions, and make sure we allow others to do, or make sure you allow other people to do so and to participate. Speak one at a time. Don't cut other participants off when they're speaking. Wait your turn until the facilitator gives you the floor. Refrain from using obscene or foul language or derogatory comments. No place for that in a meeting like this. We're all here to listen and to hear hear the presentation and ask some questions and comments. Also focus on the topics at hand, which would be tonight the recommendations for the study. The town of Grimsby is committed to ensuring a safe and respectful environment for consultants, community members, and staff. Aggressive and intimidating behavior, harassment, or coarse language won't be tolerated. Participants who don't follow the code of conduct will receive one initial warning after the first violation from the facilitator. Upon a second violation, the individual will be removed from the meeting. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Megan to do a introduction for the project team. Megan, over to you.
Thanks, David. It's going to come back to you to do a few town councillor and staff introductions, I believe. But what I'll do first, hi everyone. It's nice to, well, I can't see you yet, but I look forward to that. A friendly reminder, as David mentioned, we're going to go through this whole presentation. And if you have questions along the way, please use that comment box. We'll collect them and answer them at the end, but we are going to roll through the presentation first, and then hopefully leave as much time as we can for a good discussion at the end. So you'll see, hopefully now on your screens, the project team, certainly some familiar faces, I think a couple new ones from when we met last at the first PIC. So we've got a diverse team here, and joining us tonight, myself, Megan Rivard. I'm the project manager and senior heritage consultant on the team. I'll go through here who we have on the list on the screen. Frank Smith is next. He's our cultural heritage specialist and project historian. We also have Laura Walter, who's our cultural heritage specialist and the task manager. Oh, perfect. Sorry, if my head jumps, it's the questions are coming up on this screen. So anyways, task manager and our cultural heritage specialist. So you've heard from Laura before, and you're gonna hear from her again tonight. We also have David Waverman, who's our senior landscape architect, who's joining us to represent the landscape component and views and vistas. And then we jump down, no offense, David Kielstra, to the end, who is our public facilitator as well. So David will be, has kind of set us up and then is going to be helping moderate the discussion when we get there. So a few quick acknowledgements as well from the town of Grimsby. We've got Garrett France Wiley here. He's a heritage planner with the town. Oh, sorry about that. And then we've got Bianca Veraccia. She's a heritage planner as well. Terry, oh, sorry, I'm losing someone. Hopefully everyone can see me. Terry Donna Edwards, supervisor of planning. And then Walter Basic is the assistant director of planning, joining us tonight as well. And if you'll give me just a second here, I see that we have some counselors in attendance as well. So we've got Councillor Leanne Vardy and Councillor Reg Frake. They're in attendance tonight, I believe. And a quick thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. It's switch to the next slide, and it's been a long process, and we're really excited to be here tonight to share our findings of our HCD study with you. So as my colleague David mentioned, the discussion tonight is really going to focus on our findings and looking to hear from you, your thoughts, experiences, and really bring it full circle from where we started our first PIC, which I will review as well. So to begin with, these are a few familiar slides that just talk about the Heritage Conservation District in general, and then also the process. So while we try to minimize acronyms, HCD is one that you're going to hear quite a bit tonight. As you know, we mentioned off the top, these are really change management tools that look to manage change responsibly in an area that contains cultural heritage resources. These can be buildings or landscapes, and do tend to focus on the tangible largely. As you'll hear tonight, it includes a process of evaluation that looks at the characterization of the study area, and then an evaluation against a criteria that is outlined in the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. You'll see that link on your screen. And as mentioned, this presentation, as well as the recording, will be posted on the Let's Talk page, so you'll be able to have access to these links. It's important to emphasize right up front that the HCD study is the first of a two-phase process when we're talking about heritage conservation districts. We really are focusing here on the merits for consideration of designation. The plan stage, which is, I think, what we hear, certainly what we heard a lot about in the first PIC, and based on our experience, definitely the shiny showstopper as far as details go in how an area is managed. But it's important to distinguish that planning phase from the study phase, which is where we are at now. It's also, as you've heard from us before, community input really is essential. We had some great responses to our first PIC and have been actively working with a steering committee as well to get feedback that way. And really looking and encouraging participation along the way. And thanks to those who participated in the surveys and our mapping exercise as well. It really was helpful. One thing that I think we tend to start these conversations off with, and I think you'll hear from us a few times this evening, is a heritage conservation district is not meant to stop development. It is intended to manage that development in a way that respects the cultural heritage of an area. So it's not a silver bullet to say an area is going to be frozen in time and never to be altered again. It's more so a tool that helps a municipality and a community manage their resources and grow in a way that acknowledges that significance, and also from a planning perspective is structured in such a way that the character of an area is conserved. It's important as a planning tool to mention again that this is one of a toolkit. So it's one tool in a toolbox available. There are other planning and policy tools. You'll hear me talk a little bit towards the end of this presentation about some suggestions we have there as part of our recommendations. So it's one in a series of tools available. Finally, I want to take just a moment to not so much explain, but point out the difference between what we refer to as a Part 5 versus a Part 4 designation. So you're probably more familiar with the Part 4 designations under the Ontario Heritage Act. These look at individual properties. So they're kind of, they're the more accessible one. That property is important, so it's designated. When we're looking at Part 5 designation, which applies to a heritage conservation district, it's more so the sum of the parts. So as opposed to an individual property, it's a collection of properties that speak to a similar character. It's also important to acknowledge, again, you'll hear a little bit about this later, the listing of a property as well. So that would be a property that's been identified to have potential heritage value, but not been formally evaluated against a specific set of criteria. For those in the heritage world, it's Ontario Regulation 906 that outline the criteria that we look at to inform the designation process. There will be no legislative quizzes at the end, I promise, but wanted to lay some of the groundwork there so that we're all on the same page. As it pertains, again, to the kind of structure of the process, as you'll see, we're well on our way. The request to designate a district it rolls through council. You'll hear me say this a couple times as well. The Municipal Heritage Committee also plays an important role in not only the identification of an area, but also informing the study and providing feedback that way. And then we, as we spoke to you last time, are in the midst of the HCD study process. So you'll see a little cutout there on next steps. It's important to note that from here, we are nearing the end of the study. And that from here, there'll be a staff report that goes along to council that will capture any sort of changes and modifications that we respond to tonight as far as feedback received, where we have issued a draft report, and then that report will form the basis of the staff review. From there, it will go to the Grimsby Heritage Committee, that presentation to council. So there'll be another opportunity to hear the collection of feedback that way. And then it ultimately, as with most things heritage, the decision to proceed with preparation of an HCD plan or not is at the discretion of council. So you see on the screen there, the kind of yes, no options. And again, it's not a package deal necessarily. Council could consider not proceeding with the HCD designation and instead choose some policy recommendations or choose to enact some policy recommendations, or vice versa. So what we're recommending thus far is for council consideration at the time that it's presented. What you'll see here on your screen is the current Grimsby Heritage Register overlaid with our study area. So in the dark purple, you'll see the designated heritage properties. And in the light purple, those are the listed properties. The study area generally extends around Main Street, west-east between Christie Street and Mountain Street eastwards, just to the town of Grimsby boundary. It's that we wanted to provide this visual to kind of give you a structure for where we move forward, and also to recognize the resources that have been identified thus far. I know it seems like a lot of HCD study overviews, but this one will be quick. Just want to highlight the various components that are contained within our study report. You'll hear about these tonight, some with a lot of detail, some with a little bit less, but certainly we're happy to speak to any of these pieces. So we're going to provide you a review in depth of the analysis, evaluation, and recommendations, but also mention some of the results of the land use and policy reviews, alongside some of the other findings and recommendations. And finally, before we get into the substance of the what we've heard previously, you'll have seen a similar slide to this at the first PIC, and really just highlights where we've been and where we're going. So there's a lot of words on the next couple slides, but we wanted to provide a bit of a summary of what we heard at the first Public Information Center. So you'll see on the left side of the screen there just an overview and kind of a refresher, because it's been a little while, of what we covered in that PIC, and some of the follow-up too, which I, again, extremely appreciative for the feedback that we received during that follow-up. We had that hard copy survey that was also online, with 85 surveys completed, which is a really, it is a testament to the not only the knowledge, but the passion that the community has for this area. And we certainly heard that loud and clear, with a huge variety of opinions and really helpful information provided. We had 20 participants in the online map, which was, again, really helpful and allowed us to understand some of the areas that, and I mean, specific places in some cases that are important to the community. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll remember the questions that we posed. So we'll get into, and I mean, these informed a lot of our recommendations, but there's certainly some that we'll be getting into tonight, and happy to revisit as well if we don't answer any of your questions this evening. We can certainly chat about it. Finally, before we get into what we affectionately call the meat and potatoes of the analysis, we will just review very quickly what the steering committee, the input and kind of the structure of the meetings there. So the first meeting really served to provide that kind of overview of process again, and get input from the committee on their thoughts of the study area in general, and kind of dive a little bit more specifically into some of the history components and development eras and a number of individual resources, and then kind of collective experiences of the study area as well. And we certainly had a depth of representation on the committee as well, from various community groups, community members, and experts as well too. So well, we really did focus on that first meeting, in the identification of resources. We did really want to get a sense from the steering committee what the community is looking for in a more fine-grained approach. And I mean, by no means was the steering committee a monolith. There were a variety of opinions expressed, all of which were considered and addressed throughout the study report itself. The second meeting that we had was certainly a little bit more recent. And just on the right hand of your screen, you'll see some of the questions that we had, some of the discussion that we looked to, and then a little bit of the influence of the steering committee into our report as well, and looking to to really get again to that fine grain, detailed approach, talking about individual properties and individual issues as well. So a lot of words, but feel free to come back at your leisure. From there, I will pass it over to my colleague, Laura.
Thank you, Megan.
The analysis portion.
So good evening, everyone. Next, I will provide an overview of the analysis. Megan, can you go to the next slide, please? So the HCD study area contains a historical development overview from the Indigenous history and the early Euro-Canadian settlement of the area to the development of Grimsby from a village to a town. From this larger contextual history, our historian developed the specific historical events that influenced the study area. The significant period of development that we identified for Grimsby and portions of the study area based on the building stock was the period between 1880 and 1929. And this was influenced by the transition to fruit growing in the area and the electric railway. This period was determined based on historic building stocks, such as the large ornate residences, which were constructed during a period of economic development in the late 19th to early 20th century. Like most of North America, Grimsby saw little development during the Great Depression and the Second World War. Following the Second World War, though, there was a surge of development and new construction between about 1950 and 1970. This is also reflected in the building stock within the study area. We see in the mid 20th century residences with minimal traditional design. This included as well the subdivision of farmland and fruit orchard lands into residential development. So next we will look at the dates of construction in the study area. So this figure on your screen is from the study and it provides an overview of the construction dates in the study area. So as you can see, there's a larger concentration of late 19th and early 20th century properties west of Wentworth Drive, while east of Wentworth Drive, the late 19th and early 20th century properties are interspersed with more infill from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. So next we will look at architectural character. So based on the property and landscape inventory, it was determined that the study area consists of a variety of architectural styles with a high representation of contemporary structures, Ontario vernacular structures, mid-20th century structures, and then our 19th century Queen Anne and Italian age structures. Next is a unique element that was retained in the study area is the 12 former fruit barns and outbuildings that we identified. And these structures are unique to Grimsby, as elsewhere in Southern Ontario at this time, barn structures were large timber structures that housed livestock and hay, while these were smaller sized fruit barns and outbuilding, and they reflected their specialized role as fruit storage. So within the study area, these are purpose-built structures. They either have a gable or gambrel roof, and they're simple in design with minimal design details. Next, we looked at building materials. So the main building material used in the study area is brick, and it accounts for primary exterior of about 52% of the properties. So this includes red brick, buff brick, painted brick, and modern brick-clad structures. The prevalence of red brick in the study area was influenced by the Grimsby Brick and Tile Company that opened in 1875. Brick was a common building material in the late 19th to early 20th century. Other 19th century building materials in the study area included stucco and stone. And the mix of building materials within the study area demonstrates the continual evolution of the study area, where changes are made to respond to changing stylistic trends and costs. Next on your screen will be a figure that shows the building heights. So this figure provides an overview of building heights and shows that most structures in the study area are low-rise. They're between 1 to 2.5 stories in height. And there's a couple outliner 3-story buildings and 1 5-story buildings. Next, in the analysis portion, we move to the landscape, and this section was completed by our senior landscape architect and our landscape architect intern. So the streets and the sidewalks tie the landscape together, linking people and places with one another. Main Street serves as an important pedestrian and vehicle linkage, as well as provides the community with shops, services, parks, and open space and institutional facilities. Within the downtown core of the study area are concrete sidewalks with street trees and furniture, while east of Robinson Street, outside of the downtown core, the pedestrian realm is more simplified with concrete sidewalks and grass boulevards. Streetlights in the study area include decorative versions within the downtown area, and then outside of the downtown are your simple, typical streetlights. Street furniture in the downtown includes public benches, garbage receptacles, bike racks, bike toolkit stands, and planters. The street furniture within the downtown area has a unified design and character. Next, they looked at the softscape. So mature trees within an area can be a strong characteristic of an established area. They can offer scale and visual continuity and provide a strong sense of place and pride in community. Street trees also contribute to defining the character of an area. The presence of street trees within the downtown help to visually divide the hardscape elements, creating a streetscape that is softer to the eye. The study area contains a mixture of street trees, that species that you can see on your screen. Softscape features of both the public and private landscape contribute to the overall character of a streetscape. This includes in the public realm, the street trees, and then in the private realm, landscape yards. Next, our study team identified 11 landmark structures and properties in the study area. Oh, Megan, I can't see your screen anymore. Megan, did I lose you?
Laura, I think she's coming back on now. She might have lost the connection.
I'm here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I got booted. Are we there?
Yep. Can you shift to landmarks, please?
Sure can.
So our team identified 11 landmark structures and properties in the study area, and these were based on the historical development section, the property inventory, and public consultation. Landmarks were considered because of their architectural elements, important historical role in the community, and their contextual position within the study area. So we identified 53 Ontario Street, the former railway station, 25 Adelaide Street, Carnegie Library, 18 Carnegie Lane, and this is the public library and art gallery, the downtown Grimsby sign, Centennial Park, the Queen's Lawn Cemetery gates, 130 Main Street East, 133 to 137 Main Street East, the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital, Park Street Elementary School, and the Bose Law House. Next, we did a visual and contextual assessment of the views in the study area. Within the study area, there are a variety of viewpoints ranging in size and significance. A main characteristic of the viewpoints specific to Grimsby is the Niagara escarpment backdrop and the way the town was established to take advantage of the protection of the escarpment. Unique topographic changes of the area, entering from a higher elevation to a low-lying elevation, create views at 3 entrances to the study area, including the west, south, and north approach to the western boundary of the study area. As well as our team identified 3 views related to landmarks, including the downtown Grimsby sign and the entrances to Centennial Park and Queen's Lawn Cemetery. So next we move into the character sub areas, and these were broken down from the larger sub areas to determine which areas merit further evaluation as an HCD. So the character sub areas for the HCD study were defined based on the accumulation of background research and analysis and our Stantec internal team discussions. The character sub areas identified and included on your screen are the Grimsby Downtown, the historical residential core, the Nell's Dubose Law Corridor, and the East End. I'll move through an in-depth overview of each character sub area in the following slides, and this overview and then our following evaluation section will be the bulk of the presentation tonight and where we're looking for your input following the presentation. So the first step was to, in order to understand integrity, was to develop our heritage integrity definitions, and these were based on the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. So to delineate integrity, each character or sub area was assigned a score of medium, high, low, or no heritage integrity. So the definitions are shown on your screen. High heritage integrity, these are buildings that retain a high amount of their original architectural elements, such as windows or doors, with little or no modification. In regards to streetscape, they have a consistent streetscape, similar building setbacks with their neighbors, similar styles, similar materials, and the landscape has mature vegetation. The medium level means that they retain at least half the original components with some modern updates. The streetscape has consistent sections with the occasional infill property, and the landscape's a mix of mature and young vegetation. Low value was that it retains only 1 to 2 of its original structural elements, and it's been mostly updated. The streetscape is not consistent and there's no distinct character, and the landscape is mostly young vegetation with the occasional mature tree. And then the last definition we used was no heritage integrity, and these were the heavily modified or contemporary structures. It was where the streetscape had no distinct character and the landscape was mostly young trees or had no landscape elements. So the first character sub area that we're going to look at is the Grimsby Downtown area. And this is bounded by Mountain Street and Christie Street to the west, the CN corridor to the north, Robinson Street to the east, and Elm Street to the south. So this area was historically contains much of the late 19th to early 20th century commercial core of Grimsby. While Grimsby was one of the earliest settlements along Lake Ontario, it developed relatively similar to other settlements that dotted the shoreline along the lake. Its development was influenced by the Great Western Railway, and that was built through Grimsby in 1854, and the later Hamilton, Grimsby, and Beansville Electric Railway, which was completed in 1894. The railway and the movement of fruit products to the market influenced the economy of the downtown area, and this is reflected in its building stock, with the highest concentration between 1900 and 1919. This area is also defined primarily commercial with mixed-use land uses, with more residential properties north and south of the main street. This area also contains an assortment of architectural styles, with the prominent style being Ontario vernacular. Building heights are relatively consistent with this area, ranging from 1 to 2.5 stories in height, and the predominant building material is red brick. Overall, for the heritage integrity, we scored this area as a medium. The area retains a high concentration of late 19th to early 20th century properties with contemporary info, and contains small sections of consistent streetbacks and building blocks that have similar setbacks, building dates, and construction materials. And then within the streetscape, there is typical streetscape elements and young vegetation. Next, we looked at the historical residential core. And this extends roughly around Main Street East between Robinson Street and Nell's Road. So this area is located on lands which were settled by the Nell's family, who played an important role in the settlement and development of Grimsby. In 1894, the electric railway was opened along Main Street East through this area. And the opening of this railway, coupled with the area's proximity to the downtown core and its location on fertile lands below the escarpment, triggered a period of growth. So most of the existing 19th century structures in this area date to between 1880 and 1899. This area was also inhabited by wealthy merchants and farmers of the community who often cultivated fruit. They built large residences in the popular styles of the time, including Queen Anne and Italianate. This area saw development pressure in the mid-20th century that resulted in many of the orchards being replaced with residential subdivisions. However, many of the original large residences and some of the original fruit bars remain. This area also includes Centennial Park, which was an important gathering space for the community, and is a site of the relocated neutral First Nation burial ground. This area is also primarily defined by residential land use, with some former residents converted into commercial and institutional properties. Building heights range from 1 to 3 stories in height, and the predominant exterior cladding is red brick. The architectural styles are reflected of these construction periods, and overall for a score for this area, we gave a heritage integrity of high. This was because the streetscape retains a high concentration of late 19th and 20th century properties with similar buildings to materials and heights. The streetscape was determined to have consistent setbacks, large lots, mature trees, and ornamental gardens. Next, we looked at the Nell's Dubose Law corridor, and this roughly extends around Main Street East between Nell's Road and Bartlett Avenue. And much of this area was historically owned by the Nell's, Kitchen, and Boslaw families. Similar to the historical residential core, this area developed into a fruit growing area and was serviced by the electrical railway. The majority of late 19th and 20th century development in this area was located west of the present day Baker Road, whereas points east were increasingly far from downtown Grimsby and therefore did not see the construction as many prominent residences. This area is also predominantly defined by residential land use with a mix of commercial properties. The majority in buildings in this area were constructed from the mid-20th century to present day, with a prominent construction period of 1940 to 1959. And this construction period is also reflected in the architectural styles that we see. Building heights in this area range from 1 to 3 stories in height. And overall, for a score, we scored this on the low side for heritage and integrity. So while the streetscape retains some of those late 19th century properties, there's been significant infill with a mixture of building dates, styles, materials, and setbacks. So the heritage integrity for those 19th century properties is on an individual scale, a Part 4 scale, rather than a collective Part 5 scale. So after the presentation of this character sub area to the steering committee last month, they requested a breakdown of the area into 2 sections. So one between Nell's Road and Linwood Avenue, and one between Linwood Avenue and Bartlett Avenue. And these are shown on your screen as well. So while this breakdown changed the data use data, with Nell's to Linwood section being more commercial and the Linwood to Bartlett Avenue being more residential, it did not change the heritage potential of these 2 areas. These 2 areas still have a high concentration of post-1940 properties with architectural styles that match the period of construction. What the breakdown did do was distinguish those outliner properties, and those are those late 19th to early 20th century properties that have distinct architectural styles or historical value. And these properties can be recommended for a Part 4 designation. Next, we looked at the East End character area. And this area roughly extends around Main Street East between Bartlett Avenue and Iroquois Trail. And much of this land was historically associated with the Book family during the 19th century. And like much of the study area east of downtown, this area was primarily home to fruit farms during the late 19th and early 20th century. While this area did experience some residential development in the mid-20th century, it wasn't pronounced as points west of the area. Much of this land remained relatively rural and was used for farming until the 1970s, when a new sewage plant opened in 1977 and restrictions eased in the 1980s. That's when we had a lot of the building stock begin their construction. This area is predominantly residential land use. Building heights range from 1 to our outliner 5-story building. Overall, the heritage integrity of this area, which is determined to be low, while the streetscape contains those late 19th century properties, there's been significant infill with a mixture of building dates, styles, materials, and setbacks. So overall, we have a summary now on your screen. Based on the findings from the character analysis, the Grimsby Downtown and historical residential core character subareas were determined to have potential for cultural heritage value as an HCD due to their collection of late 19th to early 20th century building stock, the size and scale of building stock, historical associations with fruit farming industry, and the notable park space, whereas the Nell's Dubose Law Corridor and the East End character subareas, they were not determined to have potential based on the construction dates of their building stock, architectural styles, and their lack of overall heritage integrity. As mentioned, while these 2 areas contain late 19th century properties that are important to the history of Grimsby, these properties have cultural heritage value interest under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, so individual designation. These areas do not have potential for cultural heritage value interest under Part 5 as a collective HCD. Therefore, we're moving forward in our presentation with Grimsby Downtown and the historical residential core character sub-areas for evaluation as a potential HCD based on criteria in the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. So I will turn over this evaluation period now to Megan.
Hi again, everyone. Sorry about that little technical glitch there. Thanks, Laura. All right, so we'll start with Grimsby Downtown. And just to clarify, as Laura mentioned, these 2 areas were moved forward for consideration for having potential. So it's not to say that these areas should be recognized, but rather they should be evaluated and considered for their potential value as a district collectively. You heard Laura mention a lot of individual properties throughout the entire study area, and we'll get to that to make sure that we acknowledge and call attention to those individual properties that we identified to have value or potential value, depending on the case. But I'm going to talk you through a little bit of the evaluation piece. So as kind of mentioned previously, as far as the framework goes, we look for four criteria in line with the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. And short of reading you the definitions of those, generally speaking, they look towards a concentration of heritage resources, a framework of structured elements, a sense of visual coherence, and a distinctiveness. So in order for an area to be recommended for potential designation by a municipality, they need to satisfy these criterion, or at the very least, some of them. So getting into some of the nitty gritty here, there are certainly a concentration of heritage resources that date to a period of development associated with downtown here. However, we found those to be very small concentrations of the consistent building blocks. And this is not unlike, other communities across Ontario, where there are certainly some gems, and you can see them highlighted here on the screen, of that representative of the typical late 19th to early 20th century Ontario town, with some of the more contemporary infill. It's really distinctive in Grimsby as a downtown local business area, but it's not necessarily rising to the level of a unique cultural heritage level of distinction. You can see here, as we continue to work through the downtown, that the streetscape we found to be broken up by alleyways and parking lots, as well as contemporary infill that doesn't merit heritage value necessarily. Now, as an aside, we collectively as a team, some of the uses in your downtown are creative and really dynamic, and something that we haven't necessarily seen before, but our focus here is on the heritage environment, and looking really to a cohesive street wall, where here we found more of a varied street wall with building heights, materials, dates, and architectural styles that don't necessarily represent a cohesive heritage space, but certainly, as you can see on the screen, a collection of individually significant places. Excuse me. So for the looking more at the construction period, we've got about 50% built prior to 1919, but a lot of these unfortunately don't necessarily retain a high heritage integrity. For example, Ontario Street certainly has a heritage, a concentration of buildings constructed even pre-1859 to 1919, but the overall integrity we ranked as a medium, given that it only rises to a 62% number, as well as the experience on the street. So certainly there are three heritage properties in this area that we called it of high integrity. The landmark Great Western Rail Station, the Carnegie Library, and the St. George's Ukrainian Church. So while these very clearly important and locally significant buildings were identified, it doesn't necessarily, they don't contribute to the sense of visual coherence that we're typically looking for when we recommend an area for an HCD. So it really speaks to the kind of the variety from a height, architectural styles, a setback, and a type, building land use too. You'll see a little bit of a contrast here in the historic residential core. So you'll see the criteria there to the left. We did find that this area met all four criteria. So there were certainly, what's a little bit unique here is there were two periods of development in the concentration of original late 19th to early 20th century properties which remain. And then also a second phase of development that took place in the mid to late 20th century. So, and let me know too if I'm getting choppy. I think so far I'm okay, but I might turn off my camera if it gets choppy here. So not saying anything to you, you know this, but related to the fruit farming boom in the late 19th to earliest 20th century. We've got 30%, 37%, excuse me, of the building stock date to between this 1880 to 1919 period. And those late 19th to early 20th century buildings really do allow for the original farmsteads to be clearly apparent in the landscape, and the consistency in the setback that we saw there, which I'll get to here in a minute too, but they allow for an understanding of the property use to be made clear. It's not necessarily interrupted by commercial use or any sort of infill that brings it closer to the street. We also found a really strong concentration of the original structural and architectural elements in these properties as well. And while there is certainly a variety of design influences here, they all date to that period and really speak to some consistency that we identified in this area. So calling out the ones that we've used on the screen here, the Ontario vernacular, the Queen Anne, Italianate, arts and crafts, Edwardian, or colonial revival, really capturing a nice breadth of late 19th to early 20th century architectural styles. You also see, as the name kind of gives away, the predominant land use here is or historic land use too is his residential. So we've got a 77% concentration here. Well, we do have some variety in heights. These all come in under 3 stories, so a range between 1 and 3 stories in scale. And that consistent setback is really something that we look for, particularly given the prominence of this road with which they're placed upon. It's not your average neighborhood street. So the fact that the consistency in the setbacks has remained dating to the late 19th century is a pretty remarkable example of the true prominence of some of these residences, and then the infill that took place in the mid to late 20th century. So the setbacks, also to call out specifically the deep front yards with mature trees, open lawns, or ornamental plantings. We really found a sense of visual coherence here, and we do have some more modern infill. There's certainly less contemporary infill, and the maintenance of the setback here really looked to lessen any sort of impact on the understanding of the area's history. And as far as the later building boom goes, it really speaks to that story of the history of the space where these lands were subdivided and looked to be used and to further that residential use throughout the area. So again, a lot of words here, but really what we're looking to communicate here is we found that the Grimsby Downtown does not necessarily merit consideration as an HCD. You'll see in our recommendations some individual properties that we call out as far as listing and designation go, but we just really didn't see that sense of visual cohesion that we would expect to see in an area that merits consideration as an HCD. That's not to dismiss the history. That's not to dismiss the some of the true gems that are apparent downtown. It's more so looking to that coherence and the ability to really characterize an area such that it can be preserved within a planning and policy framework. As far as the historic residential core goes, we did find that that merits consideration as an HCD. As you just heard me speak to, it's really that concentration of late 19th and early 20th century properties with later mid to late 20th century infill while maintaining that consistent setback. It also, the history, which I've kind of skimmed over a little bit here, certainly, speaks to, the two landmark properties that we identified there and the associations with the Nell's family, as well as, the predominantly residential nature of the area. Even if there's some conversion that's taken place, it reads very much like a residential neighborhood on a very prominent, large main street. Also, I don't want to dismiss the deep front yards as mentioned, and the mature trees and ornamental gardens certainly add to the understanding and the history and the prominence of the area. So I'm going to walk you through here the recommendations from our HCD study report, and really looking for some feedback on not only everything that we've presented thus far, but some of the ways that we've suggested the town move forward with considering the nature of heritage resources in this wider study area. So I'm going to talk to each of these individually, but as you've heard us say already here, we're recommending an HCD plan and guideline for the historic residential core. We also have made reference to some policy reviews that will speak to some of the concerns that we've heard from the area, but also the management of resources into the future. And then, as mentioned, the consideration for Part 4 designations and listings. So starting first with the recommendations and the boundaries. I'm not sure how many more times we want to say we're recommending this area for an HCD plan and guidelines. But just to call out very specifically the boundaries, and certainly looking for some feedback, looking forward to some thoughts here from the community. Generally speaking, though, we go from both sides of Main Street East, from Robinson Street and Nell's Road, and wanted to be clear as well on Strathern Ave, just because it fronts onto Main Street. So happy to answer any questions there if there are any questions to particularly that Strathern Ave, because it kind of stands out a little bit, but it's fronting onto Main Street. So that's hence the inclusion there. Much like a Part 5 or 4 designation, Part 5 properties or areas do typically include a statement of cultural heritage value or interest. So for those of you involved in designating Part 4 properties, this looks somewhat similar, although again, it makes reference to the Ontario Heritage Toolkit and the framework that's provided there. I don't want to read this necessarily, but suffice to say that, we make clear the description of the area, making reference to the design and physical values that we've described thus far in this presentation, and calling out some specific design influences, as well as those stately homes, and also the high degree of craftsmanship. From a historical association perspective, the Nell's family obviously is a very influential family in Grimsby in general, and certainly this area more specifically. It speaks as well to the evolution of the land use here, and division of land from the historic association perspective as well, where you see the large estates being subdivided into more modern infill that's consistent with the character of the surrounding area. It's also important, and we haven't really called it out thus far, but this area also does include the area associated with the First Nation burial ground here. And it's certainly, you see that's the kind of part here, if I go back, that juts out, that captures the park. That speaks to the evolution of the area as well, much before these buildings were constructed. And then from a contextual value, this is where it relates, the buildings relate to each other, and this area relates to those surrounding it. And we found it to be a representative collection of residential properties and really a cohesive streetscape. So this is where we found the mature vegetation, and even some of the more modern and new plantings really help develop this character. From there, these are the policy review recommendations that are contained within our report. Now, I don't want to get into the Bill 108 or any of the implications on timing from there, although certainly happy to answer questions about it. But we do recommend that any zoning bylaw amendments within the proposed HCD boundaries be circulated to the Grimsby Heritage Committee. So that's something that is a bit of an addition, but certainly would help to inform the land use changes and any sort of zoning components as well. Again, happy to get into some of the planning components if there are questions, but understanding that the regional official plan and town official plan review process are underway, are going to be going. We do have 3 here recommendations for consideration. So the first is just capturing those properties that are immediately adjacent to the HCD through the use of urban design guidelines. So these are tools that can help to guide development. They're not quite as stringent as an HCD would be necessarily, but it would prevent any sort of really impactful developments from not considering that character area. So that's one big component. It's important as well to recognize the restoration that's been happening and ongoing truly since this area was settled, excuse me, as a key contributor to the community improvement. So really looking to bolster that acknowledgement of heritage restoration and encourage the restoration of resources and the adaptive reuse as well. And then finally, looking towards a CIP a community improvement plan that would encourage property owners through whether it's financial incentives or tools as well for the proposed HCD, and then also very specific targeted spaces adjacent that would improve the redevelopment projects and respect for the HCD, the proposed HCD as well. The next slide I have is a map that shows these designations and listings. You'll see, I mean, the town certainly has done a great job as far as the identification of listed properties. So the purple ones here are already listed. And based on our research and findings of our study, we would recommend these properties for designation. And then as far as adding to the listing, there are 4 additional properties that we highlight there as well that we recommend for consideration as well. And again, happy to come back to any of these slides and talk through them as well. Then you'll see on your screen now the current and recommended designations and listings. And if you'll allow me to pull my head over here for a second here, the 4 properties you can see mapped here, and then looking to recommend the larger blue swaths here for designation as well. And finally, before we get into any questions, which is going to be imminent, I promise, wanted to pull up, we've heard a lot of questions, and this is certainly a very hot topic in the heritage world across the province, and I mean, quite frankly, the country. So wanted to provide a little bit of information up front on property insurance. It's a challenge. There's no way around it. However, it is not well, individual insurers make their own choices as far as who to insure and who not to insure. A few key takeaways here are that heritage does not in a district have to be replaced like for like. There are design guidelines and requirements that would need to be considered, but you certainly don't need to go out and source a 200-year-old beam if that's what your house contains, or your barn or shed rather. It's important to note though that there is some creativity required when it comes to insuring not heritage homes, but older homes more explicitly. So this is something that is certainly on the radar of heritage professionals such as myself, as well as the rest of the team here and the insurance industry more broadly. So what we've done with this slide is to provide some additional resources, one directly through the Insurance Bureau of Canada, which the National Trust is working closely with to try to address this concern. And I mean, it really has been something that it's hard to track the consistency of it, because we've heard of issues from individual property owners across the province, but then, someone a few blocks away didn't have any issues. So it's challenging to get a pulse on, but is certainly on the radar in the minds of heritage practitioners. The government of Ontario also has some resources, and then we provided a link to a YouTube video that the National Trust put out a panel, which included heritage professionals, and the first steps after the survey that was completed by the National Trust. So some useful resources for you. If there are any questions there, again, happy to get into that. This is our required last slide so that you can see all of our information and put it up here before we open the floor for discussions. Feel free to reach out directly. Both Garrett and I have our names up there, as well as the Let's Talk Grimsby page, and to make sure that you're keeping up to date with the most recent information. So if you'll give me a moment, I'm just going to switch so that I can maybe see some of these questions. And David, I'll pass it back to you for a moment while I switch my screens here.
Sure thing. Thanks, Megan. Before we get into the comment portion, I just wanted to remind everyone that, and also thank everyone for being so patient as we switch gears here. But just a reminder that the session ends at 8 p.m. But we're happy to have individuals from the project team here to answer questions. You can continue to provide them in the chat box, and we can answer them as they come up. I would ask individuals that do want to speak, just so we have sort of a good flow, is to use the raise your hand feature. It's usually on the bottom of the Zoom bar. So you can just click that and a little hand will appear next to your name. And then we can get to your question in order as best as we can. And I do have a couple comments from the chat that I just wanted to bring up really quick while we have those. Megan, I was just wondering if you wanted to bring up the boundaries, the boundary page. And we can always come back to this one, but I just feel like it may help orient people to the area we're talking about here. And we can always flip back to a slide if there's a particular comment.
Sounds great. We'll do.
Yeah. So I'll just do a question from the chat really quick as our first one. So somebody asked, with 50% of development happening since 1940, have we already lost the basis for heritage apart from specific properties that are already registered and or want to be included? So I think this is related to development that's happened since 1940. This was an early on question, so it's possible it was already answered, but just over to the team if they want to comment.
Yeah, certainly, David. I think I'm happy to. I can't seem to see the question, so I'm just going to rely on you folks. But yeah, I think that what's key there, aside from the building dates, is the more so the consistency in how it was developed. So without getting into the some of the intricacies of more modern development, the construction period here really allowed for the predominance of the historic property to be maintained while subdividing the lot into residential development areas that are of a little bit of a later date, but still maintain the overall character of the area.
Perfect.
So hopefully some more of our information answered that, but happy to come back to it.
Sure. And then we'll take one from the individuals with their hands up, and then we can go back to comments in the chat window. So I'll start with Jeff.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Perfect. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm here on behalf of the Masonry Works Council of Ontario today. I know my colleague Andrea is in the audience, who does live in town. I just wanted to make a comment that I appreciate a lot of the heritage consideration was placed on the fruit growing heritage, which is obviously an important element. But I think one element that should also be focused on is the clay and ceramics and brick heritage. Grimsby is also home to the former Beamsville Brick and Terracotta Company, which was based at Durham and Highway 8 back in the late 1800s to early 1900s. This site shipped brick as far away as Montreal. And we can see the brick legacy sort of reflected in the fact that more than 50% of the buildings we're talking about are masonry-clad buildings, particularly red and heritage brick. So one thing that I think is important is we agree with the idea of the central historic residential area being labeled as a heritage area, but we also think that or would hope to see policies similar to a CIP or architectural control implemented in boundary areas to ensure that new development does respect that historic character. So I would wonder if that's something that's been considered, not in terms of prohibiting development. We think that there needs to be a balance between heritage and allowing for development to go forward, but with clear guidelines to ensure that any new development respects the historic character.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. That's great feedback. We're a big fan of the what you do with the masonry pieces. Yeah, so I think that kind of gets to our policy recommendations, areas for consideration, where I'm just going to pull the slide up here, where we'd like to call out that kind of speaking to that character, whether it's through materials or design elements too. So certainly that's great feedback to have. We really appreciate it, and certainly can.
I think one of the recommendations that I would make would be considering CIP areas, not only for the downtown, but potentially for the stretch between Nell's and Linwood, to consider those as sort of heritage transition areas where a higher standard of built form may be focused on.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff, for sure. You've started us off with some great feedback.
Thanks. So next, we have a couple questions related to sort of the definition of fruit barn. And another individual asked another question related to that as well. I think I'll just quote it. I think it's misleading to group fruit barns and outbuildings together and then title the section fruit barns. In the case of my house, it's definitely not a fruit barn. It was a horse and buggy barn. Maybe you want to answer that at the same time.
Yeah, I'm just looking for the slide here that we've got our
Slide 19.
nope, wrong one. So close. There we go. So as far as the characterization of these, we don't necessarily, and I mean, happy to let anyone jump in here too, but we definitely did look to make that distinction without doing, a deep dive on each property building use. But I think we've tried to kind of capture that through the use of outbuilding. And while they may not have been associated with, the fruit storage or fruit handling, we have made a bit of a connection through the use of the property or the association of the property landowner and the industry. I'm not sure if that gets at your question, but it would be helpful if there's, I think we have kind of strived to address them as outbuildings, but definitely good feedback to have and make sure we're being attentive to the details there.
Megan, just also to add, because some of them were set back at the back of the properties that we couldn't see through our property inventory that we did from the public realm on the sidewalk, we also worked with the Grimsby Historical Society to help identify which structures were fruit barns or outbuildings. So these are just provide, terminology, we just use them interchangeable, but mostly these were structures that related to some kind of fruit farming industry on a former farm property.
Okay, great. So we're going to turn it over to another individual on the with their hands up. Ron, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you.
A couple comments first. First of all, I thought the presentation was very well done. I'm kind of in that area. I'm in the Bosla house. So I'm outside of the historical designated region. However, my concerns are as follows. And one thing, we talk about insurance, that's fine. I've been able to find a carrier for insurance, but my concerns are it's very convoluted to get grants. There's no transparency, and that's a very difficult process, which is unfair to people like me that have to maintain these old buildings, which we love to do. The second part aggravates me even more in the fact that there is tax relief, yet our council has not gone after it. I go to Kingsville, I go to Port Perry, I go to all the towns, and they have applied for it to give tax relief to individuals that have landmark properties or designated properties. And as a result, in my opinion, I'm not sure what the council is going to do, who's responsible for it, but that needs to be put in place so that it makes it easier for not only the designated region that you want to put, because all these things cost money. It's not a bottomless pit. And as a result, I think that we should be having some discussions on what the process is to get that tax relief. I've owned this house for 19 years and I haven't seen 1 cent of tax relief. I probably have the nicest property in town and it costs a lot of money. So I'm aggravated a bit there, and that's my commentary. But I would like to see a timeline involved in when the town is going to get these tax reliefs for the properties that are entitled to it. Because if Kingsville can have it, why can't Grimsby? And as a result, I expect in the next presentations that something's going to be addressed to that. And I'd like to see a timeline on that. And I'm not sure it's your responsibility or the town's responsibility to apply, but it needs to be applied. And I know the funds are there. I went in and found out that the funds are there from the Ontario government. And as a taxpayer, I expect to get some relief. So I'm asking, when is the town going to get that in place, and what's the process to get it done? Secondly, same thing, transparency in how these deeds work. You got to be a Philadelphia lawyer to figure it all out. What's entitled to, what you're not allowed to do, and whatever. So those things are all things that would help make the process easier, but also help the individuals that maintain these properties. And we do it lovingly because it does help the town. But I get nothing back in return. And that's the issue. And I only come on these things once in a while because I'm a busy guy. But from my point of view, love to do what I do in my house. My wife loves to do what they do in the house. But nowhere do we see these supports. And why aren't they shown transparently? And why isn't the town going after them? And what is the process and timeline to get it done? That's my question. And I expect in the next presentations that that needs to be addressed. And you're right, on insurance, it's a hit and miss. So I'm not sure who's responsible for that, but if there's town councilors or planners, you got to get on it, guys.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ron. I can see David speaking, but I think he's on, it's not working, you're on mute. Okay. But I can certainly speak to that. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us tonight. It's really important to get this kind of feedback. Well, as you acknowledged, our report can't recommend a specific structure or really speak to any of on the tax side of things. But we certainly do in one of our recommendations. And I mean, this is something that we do tend to do across the province too, is recommend consideration for incentives. So whether that's through a grant program, tax program, I hear you, it's certainly something that we hear quite often. So thank you for taking the time to attend and provide that feedback. As far as timeline goes, so there'll be a staff report that goes to council after this. And it'll probably be in the future. It's going to be a little ways down the road, but it would be at council's discretion. I mean, you know this, but just so I can make it clear for those that don't, it's at council's discretion as far as the tax and grant processes go. But it's important to have your voices heard. And I think that's something that we certainly appreciate through this process, and something, while we can't speak to the way that it's going to work in the municipality, we can certainly make recommendations for consideration and get that onto the agenda for some feedback. So thank you, Ron. I think I'll pass it
Yeah.
back to David.
Yeah, thank you. Another comment, we'll do another one from the chat. Okay, so one of the reasons for the original study was to block or restrict development of the current Coles location. The proposed modified historical residential core HCD doesn't seem to include this property. Please comment.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. I'll give it a start, and if anyone has any more to add, feel free. I think I will. So I'm a little worried I'm going to sneeze, but we're going to roll through it. Definitely, we often see, and I mean, our team collectively has been involved in districts for the last couple decades. So the impetus for consideration for a district is often, I'll be candid, it's often in opposition to something, whatever that something is, whether it's demolition of a resource, whether it's construction of some new thing somewhere, or some proposed change to land use. What a district, though, is meant to do is, as we said, manage the change aspect of it. So you're right, the Coles property here is not included in our residential core area. And that's largely reflective of the nature of the way that a boundary is developed for a proposed HCD. We looked at the information that we had available at the time, understanding that the Coles property has been subject to an Ontario Land Tribunal OLT finding. So from a character perspective, it may have been the impetus to kind of rally a community around looking at the larger character of an area, but we found that there are some gaps in between that area and the concentration of the residential core. Particularly the use across the street kind of compromises some of the integrity there. It's not to say that's not an important resource, and I think we heard that from the Ontario Land Tribunal as well. But that's a good example of a property that, in our opinion, based on the results of our study, merits Part 4 designation as opposed to inclusion within a district.
That's great. Another comment from the floor. We've got from the chat. We've got a few of these. There's two related to the same thing. So it's a question. I would suggest the town survey all potential owners in the proposed modified historical residential core and ask them if they want this, rather than homes being effectively targeted by unconnected third parties who may want the HCD that do not live in the HCD. A follow-up question that people in these heritage type properties take pride in their maintenance and upkeep. So I guess it's a question related to further consultation on these matters.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, first to the end part of it, something that we not only recognized when we arrived in the study area, but something that we've certainly come to know through our work in the last year and a bit here, that the pride in ownership and the pride in integrity and the pride in materials is really, really apparent. So that's something that we do acknowledge in the study and really want to bring forward as something to be celebrated. Now, as for property surveys or land use or homeowner surveys, that would be something that would come up, not a survey specifically, but that's more of a council process. That's something that it's not necessarily related to the findings of our study, rather on the planning phase, that kind of community or I suppose public feedback on the proposal. So from here, as we mentioned, there's a staff report and then it's going to go to council. So at that point, and I mean, happy to hear now if there's anything specific with the study that you think we mischaracterized or something somewhere along the way, that kind of technical information. But as far as whether or not you're interested in being part of the district, that's more of a council decision, kind of land use planning, political kind of aspect. Now, having said that, I think it's important to be very clear about what an HCD plan can accomplish. So right now we're just, figuring out whether or not this is something that is merited. But when it comes to the plan stage, there's a really wide variety of types of plans. We've been involved with plans that are very prescriptive, very detail oriented, and also plans that are very open and very flexible and have, a lot of alterations kind of built into them. So you can get these guidelines, we can develop guidelines that speak to how to get your property where, as far, things like paint colors, and we can be very provide a lot of information up front, and work with the community to hear what they'd like to see the plan not only accomplish, but really get into the weeds of it. What should be delegated to staff, what should be a permit, what shouldn't be subject to a permit. It's really something that's customizable to the community. So should a plan move forward, rest assured that there is a very extensive public engagement program as part of the HCD plan as well. We start similarly with, asking, here are some examples of permits. Do you think this should be subject to a permit? Here are some examples of, changes that aren't. Should we kind of really get into the weeds on it? So I would really encourage you and neighbors and friends and community members to stay engaged, even if you are frustrated with the outcome, to remain engaged such that you can have input, because we need those, we need all of the opinions to come to the table so that we can try and find that balance that is so essential for a successfully functioning HCD.
Thanks, Megan. I'll turn it over to somebody else from the call. Nicole.
Hi there. Thank you very much. First of all, I really want to commend Ron on his comments, especially when it comes to transparency. And in listening to this presentation, it really sounds like the town council is going to make a decision whether to move forward or not before a lot of these issues are brought forward and considered. So for those town councilors who are listening, I highly encourage you to consider the fact that the people who live along this street are left with the burden of whatever decision you make. I, by the way, live in Grimsby Beach. I've had the challenges with insurance. Our house is over 100 years old. We had to get insurance. It took, I think we could talk to at least 15 insurance companies before we were able to find someone who could insure us. And the process was that we were actually on the block for heritage designation, so we had to reveal that to them. And when we finally did get a quote for our house, which is over 100 years old, with no heritage, it was one price. And for heritage designation, it was 4 times the amount. So that is pretty significant, especially since it was already more expensive just due to the fact that it was an old structure. The other thing that I think that the town really should be considering is the fact that, yes, you want to protect these old homes, but we also need intensification, especially along Main Street. The businesses need it. The only people who will be able to afford these properties will probably be people from outside of Grimsby. It's going to become incredibly prohibitive. So I'm not sure I agree with this idea of protecting the vista. I had no idea that this was a fruit farm area before, and I don't think anybody would understand that. And I think that we have to look at alternatives, Some of these homes are enormous. They could be turned into co-op apartments with additions on the back. There's just so many other things to consider. And the other one is just the walkability of the town. There's a division called Grimsby by the lake. It's a bit of a disaster. I think that intensification needs to be spread throughout the town without having to go and develop more fruit land. And then the last thing that I think that the town needs to consider is that there's so much focus on the fruit lands and the farmers. Well, we already have a lot of farmers, living farmers right now in the area. And what is the town doing to support them so that that industry actually doesn't disappear? I think that the focus is a little bit lopsided. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for your comments. If anyone wanted to discuss those, you're welcome to, or we can move on to another one.
Sorry, David, just really quickly, Nicole, you brought up a point that I don't think that we've really addressed in this, and it's worthwhile sharing. Notwithstanding all of your other points that I think are certainly this is an appropriate space for. So the land use component, you mentioned the large residences, excuse me, the large residences and the potential to subdivide them and make multi-residential or additions along the way. And that's certainly something that we've seen quite extensively throughout heritage districts. I think, to be blunt, we're not particularly concerned with the use of the residences necessarily. We do tend to focus more on the experience of the area. So not to dismiss any of your other points, but just wanted to mention that for you and for everyone too, that we don't get into, in a district, we don't really look at the use of it. So this isn't going to lock anyone in to always have a residential use or excuse me, or single family residential. There's no real tool for that within a district, but just something worth mentioning. But otherwise, I'll pass it back to you there, David.
Great, thanks. There's two comments related to bylaws and rezoning. So what is the current height allowed in the bylaw, and what rezoning are you proposing?
That one is getting specific. I think I might need to see if we can pull up what the current policy pieces speak to there. Not making any recommendations at this point as far as any sort of zoning goes, or any changes to the land use. Walter, I see you've joined us here, so maybe I'll pass that to you. You're certainly the expert on that.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Specifically, the height restriction in most residential zones, including the Main Street residential zone, which most of these lands are subject to, the maximum height is 9 meters. And for sloped roofs, that would be halfway up the slope, as defined by our zoning bylaw. And I don't believe, like you said, Megan, I don't think there are any zoning changes associated with this exercise at all. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks for that, Walter and Megan. We'll do another one from the discussion. Hunter.
Hi there. Don't know. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Hunter.
Okay, wonderful. It's Hunter Reed, and I'm part of the one of the owners of one of the tracks here on 82 Main. I'm interested in, I guess, two things. One, I want to refer back to a comment and appreciate a lot of the different comments that are coming up here and questions. I was certainly unaware that there's not a process yet put in place, to assist those of us that may end up in heritage or who currently are. And I'm not sure I heard a clear answer on what the steps were when Ron asked the question. So maybe if we could readdress that, just simply who's responsible and what are the steps in that regard. And the other comment I wanted to make, so if you don't mind, 2 points. My understanding was that Main Street East, as much as we're talking about the setbacks, being a regional road is likely to be expanded in the short term. Maybe somebody can comment on that as well.
Thank you, Hunter. So in regards to your first point about the grant, so at this stage, we provide our recommendations from our report to staff, and then they provide that, it goes to council with the recommendations. But I was wondering, is Bianca or Terry or Walter, could you speak to anything heritage-wise that's going on with the town with the grants at this time?
Hi, Laura, I can take that one.
Yeah, thank you, Bianca.
No problem. So we do currently have a grant. It's a matching grant with the Niagara region. And it does apply to properties that are designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we don't have any districts at this time, but if we were to have one, they would be eligible as well, properties within that boundary. And that grant is for restoration works. And so in order to apply for that, we do have the documents on the website, but you can always reach out to myself or Garrett at Town Hall, and we'd be happy to help you through that process. Thanks, Laura.
Thank
Ron?
you.
Sorry. On the regional road question, Hunter, it's a good one and certainly one we've experienced in other HCDs as well. It always adds a layer of extra consideration. So the region would look at if this were to become a district, it would have to consider the impacts of any sort of road expansion and ensure that it's done in a way that aligns with the Heritage Conservation District Plan and guidelines. So it would be similar to if the region was going to modify a historic residence. It's one of those areas that would need to be taken into consideration, and should this proceed to a plan, I'm sure the region would be an active participant in the plan development, so that ideally we can be proactive in that way to consider some of the implications and ways to mitigate, lessen, and just generally address any impact on the character of the area.
I appreciate the responses to, has the region been consulted at all yet in this process?
I could probably take that one, Megan. So I was just going to note that we do have a representative from the region that has been assigned to this file, and we've been keeping them up to date with the current status. And we've had a few questions about the road widening, and we've already brought that to their attention and have asked them to provide comment on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go do another call comment. Pamela?
Thank you. First, can I ask Walter, were you answering to what the height would be allowed in this area? Or were you answering to what the existing heights are?
I was answering to what the zoning bylaw permits as a maximum.
Okay, so if this is an HCD area, is that the maximum that would be allowed, Walter?
From the zoning perspective, that would be the maximum that would be allowed, but maybe Megan can answer from a heritage perspective and HCD perspective what the rules would be.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Pamela. We don't, I mean, the short answer is we don't know. We don't tend to, that would be, I mean, that's a plan question. We don't tend to be within an HCD plan. Heights are not often explicitly called out, but rather spoken to from a user perspective. So from the street view perspective. But the short answer is that that's a plan question and certainly not something that's been defined. Or even how we don't have the means to define it because we would need to have those discussions.
So is there going to be a 4-story, a 5-story that could be permitted in here? I guess what I'm asking is if you're looking to implement an HCD in this area, what assurances do these homeowners have of what the height would be allowed around them?
That's something that we develop at the plan stage. It's right now we're just looking as to whether or not it merits consideration. So it's really hard to say. And I mean, more explicitly, it's something that's looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So there would be a process that would consider the impacts of those heights, whatever the proposed heights are on the district.
Okay, so from my perspective, this is the time where as homeowners, and I sit on the Heritage Committee, the due diligence is relevant to these property owners for kind of understanding what's involved. And we've had a limited amount of time in terms of public engagement and even stakeholders engagement. We've likely had no more than 6 hours for this. So there are a lot of questions. And from the heritage perspective, I really appreciate the people that spoke to grants, taxes, insurance, as I brought up in our stakeholders. I had property in the US that was designated. However, the US is far more committed in terms of supporting heritage homes, and Canada is not. As one of the G7 countries, we are the only country that does not support heritage financially. That is an overstep in terms of the government, because the government has an expectation from the towns and its communities for designation and preserving heritage, but they're not working with the homeowners. In the US, my taxes were grandfathered to the amount I likely, when I started looking at an alternative property, same amount, I was paying a quarter of the taxes. The community was absorbing the other 3/4. So this community should also be looking at, people keep talking to the relevance and importance to them in terms of preservation of these homes. But the community should have some ownership from a fiduciary, from a financial point, in terms of owning that. And we have not done enough. And since the time I've gone on the Heritage Committee, I have tried to address insurance. At times I've been shut down on it. I myself have had insurance companies walk away from me. And you have a link here for on one of your, it goes to the Heritage Trust. And that link speaks to exactly what I'm saying, is that the Canadian insurance industry, and they write in here that it is in a near crisis mode, and heritage properties are playing a small but significant role in the turmoil. So they go on to say that homeowners are literally, they could be 24 hours notice. So not just addressing taxes, the community owning part of that, we also should be looking at what's the plan if these homeowners can't get insurance, because I'm sure nobody wants to be in that position. However, if a homeowner can't get insurance, what's the alternative for them? That's a responsibility that should not be put on anyone's shoulders. And I'm telling you, when it happened to me, I had just a frightening time in my life trying to figure out what I was going to do. And so when I hear this Heritage Act being used of, that we can use this and we can do this, well, you have to take into consideration that we're people. And as a community, first and foremost, you have to think about the individuals in your community. And we all should be looking out for one another. So I appreciate, I'm a heritage home owner. I take great pride in my home, as do so many of the others. But that is just such an element of, unreasonableness that anyone should be put in that place. And our counselors, they can vote on this, but they rely on information from consultants like yourself to be provided all the facts. So, there's a lot of times where there's a lot of miscommunication in the community.
Pamela, can I just jump in there? I think the question related to the property insurance was already sort of discussed earlier, and I don't think we want to get into individual cases there. Somebody else identified the same question you had about insurance and difficulty obtaining it. So I think I definitely appreciate your comment on that and identifying that you had the same issue. But
no, I'm speaking to the fact I literally didn't have insurance. I'm not speaking to just the challenges of getting insurance. I didn't have insurance.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Definitely, don't want to get into specific property owner questions, because that's just not really the format. We're looking at the district as a whole, but definitely hear your comment. Does anyone on our team? Sorry, does anyone on the team want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, Pamela, we spoke about it too, but hear the concerns for sure. It's an important piece to acknowledge. I think it's worthwhile also acknowledging too, though, that it's an issue that's been brought up within the last 6 months. The heritage industry as a whole is collectively looking to address it, not dismissing your experience at all, but it is something that is being actively pursued by the heritage community of professionals alongside the National Trust and insurance brokers as well. I appreciate the feedback. I wonder though, I just want to, maybe David, if we could give Pamela a moment, if there was a question in there or anything else beyond the challenges with insurance that you wanted to bring to light, Pamela, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let her have a chance to talk to that.
Wow. You proposed a study for Kincardine, I believe, and their town councillors fortunately heard them on insurance, and they decided to vote against proceeding. So I appreciate you don't want to speak to insurance, but I have a responsibility as a homeowner to speak to the other heritage homeowners that have invested in these properties. We received
Pamela, with respect, we didn't propose a study. We completed a study with extensive community involvement. We went through to the plan stage and the council decided not to proceed with it. I'm not sure that we want to get into what other or make assumptions about a process that certainly had insurance as an issue. I'm not saying it's not. I don't want it to take up the bulk of the discussion today. We've acknowledged it as an issue. It's something I imagine council will hear about at the time that the staff report is presented.
Well, Megan, unfortunately, there's two counselors on this meeting, and to Councillor Freak and to Councillor Vardy, thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate it as a homeowner and someone of the Heritage Committee that you took the time to listen. They should all be on this meeting, actually.
Will it be presented to council as a whole, just for clarity?
Yes, I'm aware of the process, Megan. Thank you.
Okay,
I did have another question. So I'll come back. I have another question I'll come back to.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pamela. And I just want to remind everyone else, that you can always ask in the chat, or we can also put up the last screen of this presentation as well. Sometimes comments are you can sort of digest, and there's email addresses attached onto this presentation. Welcome your comments on this, and appreciate you having a chance to digest and provide those comments. Sometimes it's easier just to write a paragraph. I'll just do a comment from the chat, and then we'll get somebody else on the line. So we did have we have a comment from slide 49. It says there's a phrase, should not go up. Doesn't give much comfort, it says. I don't know if you can bring that up. It says if the town wants to do this, I assume in reference to the HCD, what are they willing to do to help homeowners in the proposed HCD? We probably all have house insurance, but changing the designation, the proposal is telling homeowners to sort it out. This is totally unfair. So another comment on insurance. Insurance there, and I'll just add one extra one in there related to the insurance issue as well. If a house is burned down 3 times, how can it be defined as a high heritage integrity based on the definition shown? I did ask if there was a specific property in being referenced, but none was provided. So 2 other comments about insurance.
Yeah, no, I hear the insurance concerns. It's a cyclical industry that is beyond the control of any one individual, whether it's council, whether it's community members. What I can tell you is that you do not need to replace, should you be a designated property, whether it's part 5 or part 4, you do not need to replace like for like. The majority of concerns that, as we understand it, as a collective heritage profession, tend to relate to old buildings, not heritage buildings. I'm not dismissing the fact that an insurance broker may have said to someone, we're not insuring your heritage home. That's their prerogative. The insurance industry it's a cyclical industry that relies, well, without going into a history of insurance, it relies on the ability of the insurer to manage their own risk. If they grab a heritage home, someone that is in a watershed, there's a whole list of properties that have experienced more challenging processes in getting an insurance broker. It is an issue that the industry is actively working towards. And I need to debunk the fact that if a property is designated heritage, it is going to automatically mean you'll get a call from your insurer saying we're dropping you. There are lots of insurers out there that work with heritage property owners. We're looking to develop a program through the National Trust that will reach across the country where this is being experienced and address these concerns. Unfortunately, there's no magic bullet that's going to solve the issues the insurance industry is experiencing at the moment. What I can tell you is that a few years ago, this was not an issue. I would expect in a few years, this is not going to be an issue again. However, I hear the concerns. I think it's very important to note, but I want to make sure that we provide you the resources for you to do your own research and inform yourself about the insurance industry writ large. So this is, I think we'll probably have to move on from that. I know there's going to be no satisfactory answer. It's challenging.
So we do have another one related to, it says, apart from a feel-good reason, to homeowners covered by this study, it's not clear if there's explicit benefits to being in an HCD. So I'd like to comment on that.
That's a fun one. So there are, it's, I resist the urge to stand on a soapbox and say these are the best places ever. But I will say that factually, heritage neighborhoods within the last 10 years have been voted consistently among the best places to live in the country. They're among the best neighborhoods as voted by community members as well as professional planners and have been identified as such. Home values have shown to be to increase within heritage conservation districts, contrary to some of the concerns for lowering home values. I think what we have seen, and I mean, again, our team collectively studies these districts throughout Ontario and across the country, and we tend to see the increase of what's already there, which tends to be a very solid community of people who care about their properties and their neighborhoods. So it's not going to get you a check in the mail every month, but it does provide for the ability for the community to participate in defining not only what is important through this process, as far as what you think the important parts of your neighborhood are, but also the spaces where a planning tool can provide clarity for what is within and without the character of a space. So I might just leave it at that, recognizing the time, but there are certainly benefits to a district. I'll leave it at that.
That's great, Megan. Thank you. I think we're almost at the time, so just recognizing that, I think we may have time for one more comment. I do see some others with their hands up, but we do want to provide some time. Mark, I'll turn it over to Mark, and yeah, thank you. Mark, are you there? Oh, he's not responding, so we'll do one other one instead. Do Vineland.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, it's not Vineland, it's my default name on Zoom. So it's Ian Potter. It's Ian Potter. I happen to live between Pamela and Hunter. So you've got three very passionate people that are in the proposed modified HCD. I love history. You know, I spent a long time studying history, and it's one of my passions. And I thank you to the help that you've given. I've lived in this house just for under 2 years now, and it's actually given me an education in what we have around. And one of the reasons I actually moved to Grimsby, because we love the heritage of the area. To Ron's point, we love it so much. We spend a lot of money investing on our existing houses and our horse and buggy barns, not fruit barns, to actually maintain that. And it's extremely costly, as everybody that lives in these houses can attest to. The history of the region is tender fruit. I work at Vineland Research, so my company was set up to focus on tender fruit research in 1906. So it's truly powerful for me. I can't really challenge much of what you've actually done from the survey perspective. Where I think, you know, having been on the previous webinar back whenever it was, June, whatever the period, I've lost track now. Many of the questions that we're passionate about that we're not getting responses to as homeowners that now live in this very targeted area need to be addressed by the city, the town administration, and our councillors, both present and maybe very different in about, 8 weeks' time. So it's not a question for the Stantec team, but I would implore the administration and the councillors to actually address specific questions that have been asked to them, to put us at ease on the insurance, on the subsidies, whatever words you want to call, have, so that we can actually get some sense of a good well-being moving forward. Otherwise, I think you will see a lot of negativity on this subject. It would put us a lot at ease. So I would implore anybody on the administration, I'm not sure if there's councillors online or prospective councillors online, but I would address this comment to them, not necessarily to the study team. It's got to be dealt with soon, otherwise it's just going to fester and get worse and worse.
Thank you very much for your comments there. With that, I'm seeing it's 7:59, so we're actually right at 8 o'clock. Thank you everyone very much for attending or online. Really appreciate the comments and the breadth of comments from everyone. The next step is the team will look at the comments provided and some of the feedback and digest that as well. Megan, did you want to say a final word?
Yeah, thanks, David. Just again, a big thank you to everyone who took the time out of your evening to join, to participate. We appreciate it. Anyone who didn't get a chance to ask a question or provide a comment, please, you've got our emails. All of this is up on the town's website. Don't hesitate to reach out. You can even call if you'd like. So really looking forward to taking your comments back, completing the report, and seeing where we go from there. So again, it's been a pleasure to work in Grimsby, and we have the utmost respect for the entire study area and the community, and we really appreciate your time and participation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.